Hi everyone, I'm Nick Olivo, and today we're looking at how to automate the Jaeger class for D&D 5th edition. Note that we are going to use mods to do this, so you will need a pro account to do what I'm about to show you. Before we dive in, I'd just like to thank Roll20 for sponsoring this video. The Jaeger class comes to us from Steinhardt's Guide to the Eldritch Hunt, which is a 5e campaign setting inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft and the Soulsborne video game series. Jaegers use steel and gunpowder to battle all manner of vicious monstrosities, and their powers are fueled by two key class features. Focus points let you fuel specific maneuvers, like being able to block or dodge attacks, and momentum dice, which allow you to add additional damage and effects to your attacks. This is a really cool class with a lot of great stuff going on in it, and so I wanted to create some script cards that would help us automate the tracking of these resources as we gained and spent them throughout the course of our game session. So the first thing we want to do in this process is install two mods, the first of which is the aforementioned script cards. Script cards comes to us from Kurt Jaggers. Kurt, thank you so much for building this mod. This is an amazing mod and I use it in almost all of my games. The other mod that you're going to want to install is called Fetch, which comes to us from the Metamancer himself, Timah. Timah, again, thank you for everything you do for the community. And both these mods are available inside Roll20's mod library. So just click on this tab, search for script cards, and Fetch in this little box here, install them into your game, and you'll be good to go. So our first script card will be for a focus art called Weapon Parry. And as you can see right here, we're going to expend one focus point to make a special attack that deals no damage, but instead blocks an amount of damage from an incoming attack. So as a reaction, we get to deflect some of the damage coming in here. This works unless your attack roll is a 1, and if you roll a 20, any weapon damage dice are rolled twice, and if that fully blocks the incoming attack, the target is stunned until the start of its next turn. Alright, cool. So let's build a script card for this. So here I am in my game, and I've got my Jaeger's character sheet open. So this is Keratos, and if I scroll down on the character sheet, we can see that we have our focus points here in the class resource section, and the momentum dice here in the other resource section. So our script card is going to do a bunch of things. It's going to make that attack roll that we just read about, and it will roll damage dice, and it will calculate how much damage we actually parry, but it will also ensure that we have the focus points to spend in the first place, and assuming we do, we'll deduct one, and then it will also add momentum dice, assuming we don't already have the maximum. So we're going to do a lot of things with this script card, and I'd like to show you what it's going to look like when everything is said and done. So I'm going to paste in my code here, and we get prompted on how much damage we're trying to block. Let's say that we're trying to block 7 points of damage. We'll click submit. And now we have a card being displayed in chat with the weapon parry description. We can see our attack roll was a 23. Our damage roll on our weapon was a 9, and because we were trying to only block 7 points of damage, we have successfully reduced the damage to 0. So let's see the code for this. I'm going to bring up my trusty Notepad++ window here. And the first thing that we're going to type in is !script, and then 2 open curly braces, and then 2 closing curly braces. This is what tells Roll20 that we are about to use a script card. Next, I'm going to put in this line, --# title pipe weapon parry. That's what gives us the title bar up here in the script card. After that, I want to put in the descriptive text of what weapon parry does. So to put in text, we have -- and then the plus sign, followed by another pipe, and then the actual text of the ability. And I'm just going to copy and paste that right in here. There we go. Okay, so now we have our description. Now the next thing we want to do is actually make our parry roll. And that's going to be a regular attack roll. It'll be a d20 plus our proficiency bonus plus the appropriate modifier for our weapon. And my Jaeger fights with a rapier, so that's going to be using his dexterity. So what we need to be able to do is read information off of our character sheet so that we can use it in the script card. The way that we do that is we tell the script card the ID of the character we want to work with, and then it will be able to look that character up based on its ID and read the appropriate information from it. So to get the character ID, we're going to use a line that looks like this. So what this is doing is saying, okay, get Keratos's character ID. This is Roll20's regular old syntax here. and we're going to take the character ID and we're going to put it into a variable called Jaeger. Now, the -- here means that this variable is a string value. It's text. So we're storing the character ID in this Jaeger variable. Awesome. So now let's work on making our attack roll. So the attack roll will look like this. So we'll start by rolling a d20, and then we're going to add in our proficiency bonus and our dexterity modifier. But let's break this syntax down a little bit. What we're looking at here is the Jaeger's character ID, and this star inside these square brackets tells ScriptCards to find a character with this specific ID. So it's finding Keratos. And then the colon tells it to find a particular attribute from the character sheet. And the attribute that we're finding is the proficiency bonus, which is PB. So if we go onto our character sheet and we hover over the proficiency bonus, you'll see that it comes up as @PB. So we just don't use the @ and the squiggly bracket in this syntax. We just use the text itself, the PB. And then this next part here is exactly the same. We're, again, finding the character with this specific ID, and then we're looking up the dexterity mod. And if we hover over the dexterity modifier here in our character sheet, you can see that it's called dexterity mod. So that's going to give us our attack roll, and then we're storing the result of that attack roll in this variable right here, which I've called, creatively enough, attack roll. But one thing I do want to mention about this is you'll notice the syntax here is --. That means that this variable is a number, and we'll be able to do math with it, as opposed to the --& variable that we had earlier for the Jaeger, which was just text. So that's the difference between --= and --&. So now that we have the attack roll, we want to actually display that in the script card. We want it to look like this over here, where we say your parry roll, and then the output of the roll itself. So to do that, we're going to add a line that looks like this, where we say --+, which again is outputting the text. But you'll notice a difference between this text output and the one that we did earlier is that I have some text before the pipe. And text that shows up before the pipe will be bolded like you see over here. So this is basically putting a label next to the roll itself. And then to actually display the attack roll, what we're going to do is take the attack roll variable name, we put it inside square brackets like this with a $sign in front of it. And that's what tells ScriptCards that we are outputting a numerical value into the script card. Now we have a couple of special circumstances related to our attack roll. If we go back and look at Weapon Parry's description, we can see that this works unless our attack roll is a 1. So on a 1, we're not doing anything at all. And on a 20, weapon damage dice are rolled twice. And if we fully block the incoming attack, the target is stunned. So we want to put that information into our script card as well. So let's handle rolling a 1. So if we roll a 1, nothing happens, the parry fails. So we can handle that with some code that looks like this. So --? Is a conditional statement. It's like an if statement. And what we're saying here is if the base of our attack roll, that is the raw die roll, equals 1, then we're going to do everything between this square bracket and this closing square bracket and pipe. So this square bracket syntax here, this is called a code block. And so the items inside the code block are going to be a text message saying that we failed to parry. And then this --x and pipe means that we are going to exit the script card. So we're just going to stop the script card execution right there. Because we failed to parry, there's no point in continuing on. So that handles the situation when we roll a 1. What about when we roll a nat 20? Well, for that, we can put in another code block, which is going to look like this. And this one's a little bit more involved, but the idea is pretty much the same. We're starting out, we're taking the die roll from the attack roll. And if that equals 20, then we're doing everything between here and here. So this open square bracket to this closing square bracket. And in that case, what we're doing is rolling our damage dice. And I'm using a rapier, so that's a D8. So we'd be rolling 2d8 because the damage dice would be doubled. And then we're pulling in the Jaeger's dexterity modifier again, just like we did previously. So that's going to give us our total damage roll. And then, because on a nat 20, there's a possibility that we're going to stun our target, I've created another variable here called stunned, and I'm setting that to yes. And we're going to use that one a little later on, so just stay tuned on that one. But then you'll notice that after the pipe in the closing bracket here, I've got another open square bracket. That means this is an else clause right here. So if the attack roll base is a natural 20, then we do this stuff. Otherwise, we do this stuff. And it's always really important, just to mention, make sure that you always close off your square bracket with a pipe. That's what tells ScriptCards that we are done with the code block. So if it's a natural 20, we roll 2d8 and add our dexterity modifier to the damage, and we set this stunned variable to yes. Otherwise, we set the stunned variable to no, and our damage roll is just 1d8 plus our dexterity modifier. Now, the next thing we want to do is output the damage roll that we've made to the script card. So that's just going to be another simple text output line that's going to look like this, where we say -- plus, and then the label, and then a pipe, and then the damage roll itself. So we've got that output, no problem. But now we want to say how much we've reduced the damage to. And for that, we need to do a couple of things. First, we need to prompt the user how much damage they're at risk of taking. That'll be a line that looks like this, where we prompt the user with a message asking how much damage are you trying to block, and then we store that number in a variable called incoming damage, and that's going to be a numeric variable. And this line here, this prompt, will execute before anything else in the script card. So we can put this anywhere we want in the script card, just due to the order of operations of how things resolve in Roll20. This prompt happens first, and then everything else in the script card happens after that. So we're just going to have this prompt right here. The player will type in how much damage they're trying to block, and then we need to do some math. And the math is going to look like this, where we take the incoming damage that we've prompted the user for, we subtract our damage roll from that, and then that gets stored in another variable called remaining damage, which is what ultimately gets displayed over here. But you may be looking at this and wondering what this min:0 is all about. Well, let's say that we have 7 points of damage incoming, but we block 9 points of damage. We don't want it to say you reduce the damage to -2, right? Your player isn't regenerating hit points from this. What we want to say here is, if the value that we get as a result of subtracting these two numbers is less than 0, set it to 0. So this way, we're never going to have a negative number here. We're always going to have either a positive number or 0. And you can see that right here. If I hover over this one, we see that I did have 7 points of damage I was trying to block. I blocked 9 points of damage. We used min:0 on that, which means that remaining damage ultimately got set to 0 instead of -2. And then once we've performed that calculation, we want to display it in the script card like you see right here. And that's, again, with one of those text lines that's just going to look like this, a -- plus with the text you reduce the damage to, and then remaining damage. Let's jump back to the description real quick again. So on a nat 20, if we fully block the incoming attack, the target is stunned. So we want to handle that as well. And that's going to be done with a line that looks like this. So it's another conditional statement. So if our stunned variable that we created earlier equals yes, and the remaining damage equals 0, then we're going to put out a message that the attacker is stunned. And you'll see right here, I'm not using a code block in this conditional because there's only one thing I want to do, which is put out that text message. So if we're going to put out just a text message in line like this, what we can say is plus, that's saying it's a text message, and then we use a semicolon instead of a pipe, because in line, what the pipe does is says that the command is over, and that's going to confuse things. So plus and semicolon is the same thing as this right here, -- plus pipe. And you only use this in conjunction with conditional statements. So that's going to put out a message saying that the attacker is stunned. All right, so now we want to handle some of the housekeeping here. So after we've used this weapon parry ability, we want to deduct a focus point off of our character sheet. And if we look at our character sheet, we can see that our focus points are stored in the class_resource section. But if we're just looking through the code, it's not going to be really obvious what class_resource represents. I want to refer to this as focus points in my code. And I can do that. What I'm going to do is actually scroll up to the top, and underneath the title here, I'm going to add another line that looks like this, where I'm basically declaring a variable called focus points, and I'm assigning it a value of class underscore resource. This effectively allows me to create an alias for class underscore resource called focus points. And that's just going to make it easier for me to understand what's going on in my code. So let's scroll down again here. And I just like to keep declarations like that up at the top of the card. It makes it easier for me personally to read. You could have put it down at the bottom, but like I said, my personal preference is to have these up at the top. So let's scroll down here now. And I'm going to add another line to deduct the focus point from our character sheet. And that's going to look like this, where we say, get the Jaeger, that is the character ID, and on the Jaeger's character sheet, look up the focus points, which this is the variable we created that equals class resource. So this is that alias that we made. So the Jaeger's focus points, which are the class resource, we're going to set that value to whatever the value currently is -1. So that's what this syntax is doing here. It's saying get the current value and then reduce it by 1. And just for completeness sake, this --! means that we are looking at a specific attribute on the character sheet. So the focus points in this case. So we've reduced our focus points by 1, but when we spend focus points, we gain momentum dice. So what we need to do is increase the momentum dice value by 1 as well. And this is going to work very similarly to what we just did with the focus points. If we look at the momentum dice, that's stored in a value called other resource. And so just like before, I want to make it very clear in my code about what I'm actually manipulating. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top here, and underneath the focus points bit that I added, I'm going to add another one called momentum dice, which refers to other resource. And then we're going to have a line very similar to what we just saw for expending the focus points to add a momentum die. So it's the same kind of line. Again, it's the !A, meaning we're working with an attribute on the character sheet. It's just this time around, instead of reducing something, we are increasing it. And so we're going to increase our momentum dice by 1. Okay, so let's take this exactly as it is right now, and let's run it. So I'm going to paste the code in here and run. I'm going to scoot my notepad window out of the way, and we see we have our prompt. How much damage are we trying to block? Let's say we're trying to block 6. We'll submit that. We have our attack roll being made, so a d20 plus 2, which is our proficiency bonus, plus 3, which is our dex modifier. Our damage roll is a d8 plus 3, and we reduced the damage down to 0 because we were blocking 6, we rolled an 8, and so we have that being displayed properly as 0 rather than -2. And we can see here that we are now out of focus points, and we have 2 momentum dice. But that raises an interesting question. I'm going to paste the code in again, run it again. All right, let's say this time around we're trying to block 9 points of damage. We'll submit that, and I rolled a natural 1. Okay, cool. Let's try again. And let's say this time around I'm trying to block 8 damage. Okay, you can see here we've just gone negative in our focus points. And that's bad. In fact, I shouldn't have been able to make this one previously because I was at 0 focus points. So we don't want our players to be able to go negative in the focus point section. So we need to put some logic in here to check and make sure that they have focus points available before they try to use this particular focus art. So let's see how to do that. All right, so back in my code here, first thing I'm going to do is grab a reference to the current number of focus points I have. And I'm going to do that with a line like this, where we say current focus points equals Jaeger and focus points. And just to keep things clean, I'm going to grab my Jaeger declaration from down here, and I'm going to pull that up as well. I'm going to make that the first variable that I create. All right, awesome. So we're checking to see what do we have for focus points right now. And then we're going to build in another code block, which is going to look like this. And I'm going to put this before anything else happens in the script card. Basically what we're saying here is if our current number of focus points is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to display a message to the player saying you are out of focus points, and then we will exit out of the script card, and then that will be the end of it. So if we copy all this and run it again right now, you can see we still get a message saying how much damage are you trying to block, but then you're out of focus points. And like I mentioned earlier, that prompt that appeared is because of the way Roll20 parses the order of operations, and those user prompts happen first before anything else happens within the script card. Now, there may be ways that we can suppress that, which I may delve into in a future video. Hey folks, Nick from the future here. I don't like the idea of leaving y'all hanging on how to suppress that prompt, so stick with previous Nick for a little bit longer here, and then I'll pop back at the end of this section to show you how you can suppress that text prompt. Now, the other thing we want to consider is that there is a maximum number of momentum dice that we can have, so this value can't keep going up. It does cap out. And in looking at the compendium, it tells us that the maximum momentum dice you can have is equal to your proficiency bonus plus your strength or dexterity modifier, whichever is higher. So we want to account for that in our script card as well. So we're going to do something very similar to start with here. I'm going to put in another variable line here that's going to get the current number of momentum dice on our character sheet. So we're going to look at the other resource here. We're going to say, all right, how many momentum dice do we have? And then we need to figure out how many we could possibly have. And that's going to be done by adding our proficiency bonus plus our strength or our dexterity modifier. So what we need to do is figure out which modifier we're going to use. Now, in Keratos' case here, he has a 1 for his modifier in strength and a 3 as his modifier for dexterity. So we want to use dex. We could hard code that, or we could put some logic into the script card to say, figure out which value is higher and use that. And that way, if Keratos sinks some ASIs or drinks a potion of giant strength and his strength goes up, then that will automatically be accounted for in our script card. So the way we're going to do that is with this line right here. And let's kind of break this one down because we haven't seen a line like this before. Lines that start with -- tilde mean that they are using a built-in function inside of script cards. And in this case, the function that we're doing is a mathematical function called max. And basically what max does is it takes two values and figures out which of them is bigger. So what we're doing is we're passing in our Jaeger's strength modifier and their dexterity modifier, and then the max function figures out which of those is greater and assigns that value to this variable right here called modifier for momentum dice. Once we have that, we can use another line like this one, which is going to declare the maximum number of momentum dice we can have, which will be the Jaeger's proficiency bonus plus whichever modifier is greater. So in our case here, we would compare strength and dex. We'd figure out that dex is greater. We'd assign 3 to the modifier for momentum dice. And then our maximum momentum dice would be the Jaeger's proficiency bonus, which is a 2, plus the modifier for momentum dice, which is a 3. So our maximum would be 5. Okay, so we figured out how many they can have. Now what we need to do is make sure we don't exceed that amount. So let's scroll back down to our line here where we were adding in momentum dice. And what I'm going to do is delete this line here, and I'm going to replace it with a code block that looks like this. So what we're doing here is we're checking to see if the current number of momentum dice that we declared earlier is greater than or equal to the maximum number of momentum dice. And if it is, then we're going to display this message right here that you currently have the maximum number of momentum dice. Otherwise, we've got an else block here that's saying increase the momentum dice by 1. So that's just like what we had earlier. So now let's go back in here, and I'm going to jump up my focus points so I have a couple. I'm going to copy this whole thing, and let's paste this in here. All right, and we'll scoot Notepad out of the way. All right, how much are we going to block? Let's say it's 15. Submit that. And then we rolled a 25. Our damage roll was an 18. We reduced the damage to 0 because 15 minus 18 is -3, which gets rounded up to 0 thanks to min. And then the attacker is stunned. So this is now working properly. What we can do at this point is go into our character's attributes and abilities section. We can click add. And I'm going to put in weapon parry here and then paste in my code, save that. We'll show it as a token action. And now when I click on my character, I have the weapon parry button right here. I can click it and it'll pop up the amount of damage. We submit, we get that information, and everything is working properly. If we try to do more, we're out of focus points. Okay. And then as we look over here, back on the character sheet, we can see that we will not exceed 5 momentum dice. I'll give myself some more focus points here just for illustrative purposes. Weapon parry again. And we see that we have the maximum number of momentum dice and we did not go past 5. Hey folks, Nick from the future coming back here to show you how to suppress this prompt. So what I'm going to do is replace this line here with this one. And what I'm going to do now is just run this whole thing so this makes a little more sense here so you can see what this looks like. All right, so you see we get a pop-up saying click for prompt and then click me. So when the user clicks this, they get a prompt, how much damage are you trying to block? So this looks very similar to what we had earlier. It's just now this line that displays this button to the user is not executed if the user doesn't have any focus points. So let's drop this down to 0 and let's copy everything and run the script card again. You see we get a message saying you are out of focus points. So now there's no pop-up, there's no prompt, this button doesn't appear unless we've actually got focus points to spend. So now let's take a look at this line and break it down a little bit. So --I means we are asking for a user's input. And this section right here, how much damage are you trying to block, is the text that's displayed in the prompt when the pop-up box appears. That information that we type in gets stored in a variable called incoming damage. This Q here is telling ScriptCards that we are making a query, that is, we are going to prompt the user for some information. And then click me is the text that appears on this button, and click for prompt is what's displayed right here, what gets whispered to the user. So we can change this, of course. We could make this something more descriptive. We could say click to enter damage, and then click me, and then that would display when we actually run this again. So let's minimize this. There we go. So click to enter damage, click me. How much damage are you trying to block? 23, submit. And that looks like it worked properly, but if we look here, we see that we rolled our damage here of 11, we reduced the damage to 0, but we were trying to block a lot more than that. This is not accurate. In fact, you see there is no mathematical expression here right now. It's just saying the result is -11. And that's because when you use --I, the value that you enter is always a string. That is, it's always text. So what ScriptCards was trying to do now is turn a text variable into a number, and it can't do that automatically. So what we need to do is just make one real quick tweak right here. And that is after this line, we're going to add in -- equals and incoming damage again. And then ampersand incoming damage. And what this effectively does is it creates a number variable that's set to the value of the text variable. And this conversion here will actually allow us to do the math properly. So I'm going to Control A, Control C to copy everything. Let's give us some focus points back here. Run this one more time. And we'll scoot this guy out of the way. Click me. Okay, let's say we're trying to block 33 points of damage. There we go. So we rolled 5, and then 33 minus 5 is 28. So now this is working properly again. Future Nick out. So our Jaeger has successfully parried an attack, and they've gained some momentum dice. What do they do with them? Well, momentum dice allow you to perform what are called finishers. And you can think of finishers as sort of like those visceral attacks from, say, Bloodborne or the Soulsborne games. And the finisher that you know by default is the brutal finisher. So when you hit a creature with an attack, you can expend all of your momentum dice and add them to the damage roll. And as you can see here, if you reduce the target to 0 hit points, or if they're reduced to 0 hit points before the start of your next turn, you regain 1 focus point. All right, so how would we handle that? Let's jump back into our game. And the first thing we're going to do is go over to the attributes and abilities section of our character sheet. And I want you to create an ability called Momentum Die, just like this. And that should be listed like what you see right here. I'll put this down in the video description so you can just copy and paste it. But your Momentum Die scales as you level up. It starts out at a D6 when you're going from levels 1 to 10, 11 to 16, it's a D8, 17 or higher, it's a D10. We want to be able to determine, based on our level, which type of die we should use for our momentum die, and this is going to help us with that. This is actually using Fetch, which is the other mod I had you install at the beginning of this video. So because you have Fetch installed, we'll be able to read this information off of our Jaeger's character sheet and use that in our ScriptCards calculations. So We've got that. And now to make life a little easier here, I'm not going to go line by line through this next script card. I'm just going to put in the whole thing and then kind of touch briefly on some things that are different, because a lot of these things are going to be exactly the same. Like, for example, the title is pretty self-explanatory. We've got the same Jaeger character ID. We've got the same class resource. One that's different, though, is the focus point maximum. So that's pulling this value right here off of our character sheet. And interestingly, that's not referred to as class resource underscore max like you might think. Instead, it's referred to as class underscore resource and then caret. This is how ScriptCards determines the maximum value for a particular field. We've got our momentum dice again. That's the exact same thing. But what's new here is this line right here, where we are getting the type of die we're using for our momentum dice right now. This get /.keratos.momentum die.@keratos base level get. What this is doing is starting out by looking at Keratos's character sheet and getting his level. And then it takes that number, so Keratos is level 3 right now, it takes that number and runs it through fetch. And it looks at this momentum die ability here, and it says, okay, 3 falls between 1 and 10, which means that our momentum die will be a D6. And then it's going to use D6 in future calculations. We've still got our current focus points and our max focus points. These are exactly the same as they were from the other card. But now our extra damage roll, this is where we're going to take all of our momentum dice and roll them. That's being calculated by looking at the number of momentum dice the Jaeger currently has. So if we look at our character sheet, it's going to be 5. So this section right here translates to 5. And then this right here is the type of die we're using. So what this whole expression turns into is 5d6. And then we display that right here. And then this line is setting our momentum dice back to 0 because we spend all the dice as part of this finisher. We aren't going to have any left. And then we've got this right here, this interesting little line right here, which says click the button if you killed the target or if it's been reduced to 0 HP. Let's actually run this so you can see what it looks like. Pop this in here, run it. And our attack deals 16 extra damage, so we rolled our 5d6, we set our momentum down to 0, and now we've got this button here that we can click on if we killed the target or if it gets reduced to 0 HP before the start of our next turn. So if I click this button, you see that it tells me I regained 1 focus point and the number went up over here. So this is creating a button. The button is called Click Me, and when you click it, we jump down to this add focus point routine, which is right here. And what add focus point does is it checks to see if the current number of focus points that you have is less than the maximum number of focus points you could have. So right here, we have 2, all right? So if I bump up my momentum dice again and I run this again, if I click this button, you can see we get a message saying that you already have the maximum number of focus points. So we have that logic being taken care of in here for us. So there you have it, some script cards for the Jaeger class from Steinhardt's Guide to the Eldritch Hunt. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing. And until next time, folks, have a great day.